Well, welcome to the Traffic Club of Chicago podcast on hazmat. My name is Denny Grimm. I'm with a company called Business to Business Communications. We produce programming on the Sound Business Network, and so we'd love to see and hear you on our website as well. But this Traffic Club of Chicago session is starring our own member and president of the Specialty Transportation and Regulatory Services Company. We call it STARS. Wendy Buckley is their president and CEO. She runs it. She's got a real interest in the whole of hazmat. So I'm going to suggest that you go onto both her website and onto LinkedIn to find out more about Wendy and her passion for hazardous materials and how that happened back in the day when people were running out of fires and Wendy was running into them. So I want to encourage you to go there and find out more about Wendy. As a professor, an adjunct professor, and certainly as a specialized professional in hazmat, Wendy has a lot of stories to tell us regarding hazardous material. And we might start out a little bit on the lighter side, Wendy, and talk about some of the things that are coming up. We're in a holiday season where travel, even though COVID, some folks are going to be traveling. And one of the things that they do is they take Christmas presents to grandma. Sometimes we bring them home after the trip to grandma's house. You've had some experience in that regard and how we might look at this holiday season. Tell us a little bit about what we need to be careful of when we board the plane.
Yeah, actually, you're absolutely right. This has happened. It was a company I worked for many years ago. We sold science kits, and these kits would have various chemicals in them and alcohol wipes and that sort of thing. And this one young man went to his grandmother's house for Christmas, and his grandmother gave him one of these kits. And when he took it home with him on the airplane, the FAA had a very serious problem with that. So they flagged his package, and he got in trouble. His parents got in trouble. We got in trouble. It was kind of a mess. But, eventually they understood that he certainly didn't do it on purpose. I think he was 8 years old or something. So he didn't go to jail or anything like that. But it brings to light an interesting point is that the general public still is responsible for certain hazmat rules, especially on airplanes, and they may not always understand what actually is hazardous. So I thought that might be worth a good conversation.
Well, and one of the things that maybe some of the traffic club members do is get involved in celebration. And so if we found ourselves with a bottle of wine or some beverage that we were, capped beverage that we were bringing home, those two, I think you've said, are dangerous, hazardous materials.
Yeah, actually, alcohol is a flammable liquid that goes for your hand sanitizers, your Lysol sprays, all of these things that people are now carrying with them in their purses or their briefcases or whatever for COVID prevention. They're all made out of alcohol, and alcohol is a flammable liquid. So that Jack Daniels that your mother-in-law got you for Christmas, you might not want to take it on an airplane. You can in the cabin, just don't put it in your luggage.
So you can do some things with carry-on that you can't do with packing it in luggage.
Yeah, a perfect example of that is the lithium batteries, right? So your cell phones, your game pads, like your Nintendo Switch or whatever it might be. I know Xbox has a handheld. I don't want to be, prejudiced, but any of these sort of things that have rechargeable batteries, and that's usually the key is rechargeable, that's your lithium ions, they are hazardous materials and they can catch fire in a plane. And one of the problems is these batteries, especially if they're damaged, like from dropping or overheating, using inexpensive chargers that might overheat the batteries, for example, they can cause the battery to have what we call thermal runaway. And that thermal runaway is a fire that can happen, whether it's in an airplane or on the ground or whatever, but it can be very, very difficult to put out. And so in an airplane, you can't pull over. There's no side of the road, right? You can't roll down the windows. So it becomes a very dangerous situation. So these things are really important. You can carry those on your person. You can put them in your carry-on bag, but you can't check them in your luggage that you're going to be putting in the cargo hold.
One of the things in some of the notes that you and I had shared had to do with other hazmat items. that warehouses, carriers, retail stores, we need to be aware of. So it's not just airplanes, it's other of the logistics operations that we need to be cognizant of as well.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I recently had a warehouse client of mine who doesn't normally handle hazardous materials. They took some additional inventory from a new client. It was a very lucrative contract and it was in their best interest to take it. But what they and the customer did not realize was that many of the products the customer was going to be sending to them were hazardous materials. And it didn't really become known until the product arrived on their doorstep. And they see all these marked packages and they're opening things up and discovering corrosives and toxics and flammables that they had no idea to be expecting. So now they're going to be storing all these hazardous materials on their property. They're all sitting there on their loading dock, and now the question is, what do they do about it? So, you know, one of the things you have to be cognizant of is when you're taking on new business that you may not fully understand, or even your customer may not fully understand it, which was the case here. The customer didn't understand. You know, you could end up in a very difficult situation that involves not only transportation regulations, but Environmental Protection Agency and OSHA, even fire codes.
So I'm going to suggest to our Traffic Club of Chicago members, this is an unpaid suggestion, but when you don't know, stop, call Wendy, find out, and protect yourself. Because that's exactly why we do, through the education committee at the Traffic Club, these kinds of podcasts. The goal is to make sure that you are safe. One of the things, Wendy, that's happened in our industry, kind of a bigger subject, and some of the things that you follow much more clearly and regularly through the FRA and other areas that you've actually worked in inside of government. There are some new tank car final rules that are finally being made as final rules. And so why don't you take us through just a short litany of where we're going and what's been going on in the rail industry in this particular case.
So the new tank car rule that just came out the end of November is specific to what we call PAHs or TAHs. It stands for poison or toxic inhalation hazards. Things like chlorine, anhydrous ammonia, sulfur dioxide, those are some of the real common ones. And these tank car rules are to make the tank car more robust, so that if it were to be involved in an incident or an accident, it's more likely to withstand the impact and not lose its contents in the accident. So these new rules, they have an interim for quite some time, and what they require is normalized steel. So anyone that's ever dealt with steel, when you heat it to weld it or anything like that, it can make it very brittle in certain areas that were heated. So you have to do some special heating processes to make these steel stronger again, and that process is called normalization. And a lot of tank cars that are in transportation today are not normalized, especially the older ones. And that, again, can make it very brittle. So the new rule is requiring that those tank cars be made of only normalized steel, the steel that's been treated to restore the strength of it. And go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to suggest again, I'm a shortcut guy, I can't help myself. My suggestion would be that if you're a shipper and you need to move product, and or if you're a carrier or if you're an owner of equipment, and you need to know or want to know whether or not your equipment is the right equipment for the right product to be moved on rail, let Wendy know, because she has a whole team of people around the country that she can send out to make an inspection on those cars and determine whether or not you're in compliance. And again, it's like the tax collector who is now a tax advisor. Wendy used to work in that shop that made all those rules and required all that compliance in the past. And so she and her team can help you in that regard. So please be aware of that. Are there some other, there's some other major changes taking effect? DOT is ending their RMD classification. Again, it's over my head, Wendy. Help me to know briefly what that might look like and how we might help some more of our Traffic Club members.
So this revolves primarily around consumer commodities. So mostly people that are in retail sale. So it used to be that if you're going to send a package that was or material that was packaged for retail sale, you could send it as what's called an ORMD, or other regulated material for domestic transportation. And there was some relief and certain requirements with that, and it was easily identifiable with a bright blue label. Anyway, those regulations are no longer allowed. The labels are no longer allowed as of December 31st of this year. So this has been in the works for some time, so it shouldn't really come as a shock to anybody. But what's important to know is that many of these materials will now be transported as what we call limited quantities. It's a similar rule, but the markings, for example, are very different. And a lot of times people don't realize that this marking is actually a hazardous materials marking. It's a diamond shape, black and white, it's white in the center, black on the ends. And people will see that and not realize that it's actually hazardous materials marking. So the important thing for your traffic club members to know, particularly the carriers and the warehouses that may not see this stuff every day, is that if you see this black and white diamond, it is a hazardous materials marking, and it means you just have a small quantity of hazardous materials.
I think you and I could go on for a long time talking about backgrounds and fires and the explosions and how they happen and what happens when they happen and how you fix it and stuff. It is certainly interesting. But I think where we probably ought to stop is as soon as you give us whatever might be the next best thing for our members to know about. And because otherwise I think we could just go on and on and on.
Well, I certainly could. We all know that. I love this topic. I could talk about it all day. In fact, I do talk about it all day. The next best thing to know is, like you said, Denny, I couldn't have said it better myself. If you don't know what you're dealing with, pick up the phone and ask somebody that can help you. I am more than happy to be that person, or if you have another resource. But this is not an area that you want to guess in. This is not an area that you want to say, well, we'll just figure it out. It's very, very complicated. Even when you think you understand the regulations, there may be a nuance, or maybe some exception that you don't quite understand. We've had clients take advantage of rules that didn't actually apply to them, that got them into a lot of trouble. So if you don't understand the rules, if this is not your primary expertise, just pick up the phone and call somebody who can help you. Making a mistake is a dire consequence with this stuff.
Boy, it really is. You may know Wendy from before, sitting at the head table at the Traffic Club of Chicago's annual dinner. Remember, we used to have those before COVID. And we're hopeful that they'll happen again and that Wendy will come back and join us again. She's a member of our club, so you can catch her if you're a member on the membership links, and has her number and so forth. Certainly the office at the Traffic Club can help you out there as well. But I want to thank you, Wendy. I want to thank you for taking time out for us and helping us to better understand, particularly at the holiday time when we might be traveling with a few extra packages under our arm, of what we can do, what we can't do, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, and when we don't know, that we might call you. So thank you for participating with us, and we will look to see you on the Traffic Club website underneath the webinar series, and perhaps you can come back with some more fire stories and talk to us again. We would.
I'd be honored. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you, Wendy.